Good afternoon. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychology Licensed Clinical Psychotherapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic media. David Stevens.
Here.
Ginger Hill.
Here.
Rebecca Jabara.
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Bruce Johnson. Lauren Luck.
Hi, friends.
Sarah McMillan.
Here.
Iris Poley.
I do see her present.
Gotcha. Jennifer Schreiner.
Here.
And our newest member, Elizabeth Birch.
Here.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
I am present, and I apologize, Dave. The script that I sent to you had Leslie Allen. She will be available in case we need her to log in, but otherwise she will not be present.
Okay. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Dave. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Wednesday, August 6th, 2025. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no time for public comment as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On June 23rd, 2025, we sent notice to the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who requested notice of such meetings. The notice is also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And I did check the conference call line before we began. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you, Dave. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda, which is any modifications to the agenda. Seeing none, we will move to welcoming our new advisory committee member, Elizabeth Birch. Elizabeth, you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group?
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Birch. I live in Caney, Kansas, so I'm at the very end corner of Kansas. I have a master's in clinical psychology. I also just finished a master's in social work, and I work in a school district through Community Health Center of Southeast Kansas, and I've been doing that role. This will be my 7th school year in Caney schools.
Well, welcome.
Thanks.
We'll go around and have each of the advisory committee members introduce themselves. We'll start with David Stevens.
All right, getting off mute. I'm David Stevens. I'm a public member of the Behavioral Health Regulatory Board, and so I sit on this committee as part of that. So I am the one who knows the least about what's going on in our topics, but I try to add some value. My background is in health law. I'm an attorney at a health IT company here in Kansas City, and previously was at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas City, so I've got a little bit of experience on both the payer and provider side of things.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, David. I know it looks like it, but you do not have to be named David to be on this advisory committee.
I was starting to
Um,
wonder.
Well, we'll go to David Fye.
Thank you, Dave. I'm David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And Elizabeth, we've communicated a little bit by email, but it's nice to put a face to a name and meet you electronically. So in my role, serving as Executive Director for the board, I also facilitate the 7 different advisory committees, one for each of the professions regulated by the board. So if I can help you in any way, if you have questions following the meeting, just let me know. These meetings take place 2 hours every other month. But in between, feel free to reach out to me. And like I said, I'll help you with anything you might want. And if you have other questions for staff members, I'm the best point of contact for that as well. So looking forward to getting to know you better. And thank you, big thank you for volunteering your time. The work on this advisory committee is really important to the overall work of the board, and excited to have you in this role.
Iris, are you there? You look a little frozen on my screen.
I think I am frozen. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Iris Polly. I have worked in community mental health for the past 26 years at South Central, same community mental health center, and am also a registered play therapist. So have worked with the littles as well, but currently working as the clinical director here.
Nice to meet you. I did community mental health before, but I kind of call that my past life.
Jennifer.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Schreiner. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist, a board certified behavioral analyst, and a licensed behavior analyst. So I get to work with individuals with autism spectrum disorder, which is my favorite. I am in community mental health as well. I've been doing that for 17 years. And here at Horizons Mental Health Center, and I'm currently the Director of Clinical Services.
Nice to meet
Rebecca.
Hi, welcome, Elizabeth. I'm Rebecca. I live and work in Wichita, and I have never heard of where you are living, so I wasn't sure what corner. Southeast, I heard you say.
you. So I'm like 10 minutes from Coffeyville and about
Okay.
25 from Independence.
Okay, I've heard of those. That's terrible. I've lived in Kansas my whole life. I work part-time in private practice. I just have a few clients that I see, and then my main job is I do work with the Wichita Public Schools, and I conduct the mental health evaluations for a school district. So it's good to meet you.
You too.
Lauren.
Hi, Elizabeth. It's nice to meet you. I'm sorry, I've been transitioning between devices and locations, so I apologize for being on and off camera. I'm an LCP, have practiced in Kansas my entire time, and serve as the Vice President for Mental and Behavioral Health for the University of Kansas Health System. Also have had the pleasure of meeting our patients' needs in the Kansas Department of Corrections. So that's one of my passion populations. And I'm excited to work with you. Thank you for joining us.
Sarah.
Hi, nice to meet you. I had family who lived in Caney and Coffeyville, and now they live in Wichita, so been there. I live in Salina, or I work in Salina. I have a small group practice here, master's level psychologist, and then a marriage and family therapist. But been doing this for about almost 25 years now. So not always in private practice, only private practice for about the last 10-ish years. So nice to have you on board.
Nice to meet you too.
Ginger.
Hey, Liz, I'm going to keep my camera off because I'm driving down the road and I don't want to make y'all dizzy. Liz and I have actually met a couple of times. I'm Ginger Hill, clinical director at 4 County Mental Health Center, licensed clinical psychotherapist, been with 4 County for about 27 years now, done just a little bit of everything. So welcome.
And side note, I think my husband just accepted a position as director of maintenance for 4 counties. So it's a really small
He
area down here.
did. He did, and we're
That's my
excited. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And Elizabeth, I'm Dave Anderson. Spent 36 years working at Community Mental Health Center, Northwest Kansas. I now serve as the state's Commissioner for Aging Services at KDADS. Welcome to our advisory committee. We're really happy to have you join us.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Dave, you want to move to a short summary of advisory committee member expectations?
Sure. So Elizabeth, since it's your first meeting, I wanted to kind of let you know how you'll be able to become more familiar with some of the rules that we have to follow working as a committee for a state agency. And kind of to let you know, our normal process is once a year for each of the advisory committees and the board, we have a formal training. Historically, we have done these trainings in the different advisory committees, which means for each of the 7 advisory committees, we've done sort of separate 7 different trainings, but covering the same material. So this year, as an alternative, to be a little bit more efficient and try something new, what we're going to do, instead of having that as part of an official meeting, I'm going to set up about 3 different times on different days and different times and ask each of the advisory committee members to sign up for one of those 3 times. The material is the same, so we can have a blend of the different advisory committees, a blend of board members, but we're going to put out some notice about those meetings. It'll be electronically, so it'll be on Zoom as well. But I just want to kind of let you know that'll be a chance to become more familiar with some of the rules of state agencies, like the Kansas Open Meetings Act. And I also like to provide a little bit of preliminary information at the first meeting. This is also a good reminder for members of the committee. If you're used to working in other groups that are not subject to the same requirements, if we have back and forth discussion by a majority of members of the committee, where the subject matter relates to the work of the committee, basically that needs to be in an open meeting. So that can be a communication where you have people physically in a room. It could be over a phone call. It could even be email communications back and forth. But if you're used to working with other groups that aren't subject to that, you might be familiar with those groups doing a lot of work behind the scenes, working together, and then coming to the meetings ready to go into things. With this, if it actually is more than just a few volunteers, then you would really need to have that be done in an official meeting like this. And so we will put out notice about all official meetings. And if you ever have questions, feel free to contact me. You're always free to contact me, contact the chair of the advisory committee, Dave Anderson. We can help you or connect you to other staff members. But I would like to provide a little bit notice about the open meeting rule because some people may not always be familiar with that. So again, the requirements are if it involves the majority of members of the committee. So in this case, you would have to have 7 members of the committee. If it would be interactive communication, so back and forth, and then it would involve the actual topics relevant to the work of the advisory committee, those things would need to be in an open meeting. So I will send information out to members as far as like the agenda, meeting materials, that kind of thing. Just make sure not to reply back to all the members of the committee because that way, you know, it could get into the discussion back and forth. The other thing too, our records in general are open to members of the public under the Kansas Open Records Act. So different communication like letters or emails or different things like that could potentially be subject to KORA unless there is an exclusion that would prevent that. Or sometimes information is confidential and would be redacted. But in general, the rule for agencies is that the records will be open to the public. So I would like to remind new members of the committee that when you're thinking of records, just make sure you remember things like email or other things like that could potentially be subject to a KORA request. And so just make sure to always stay professional, and you guys are all professionals, so you don't really need a reminder about this, but I always try to put a yearly reminder out there as well. So, so those are just some preliminary things. I don't want you to feel that you can't reach out to members. You can always contact a member here and there about a topic. It's just to be mindful of those things. And like I said, we'll go into a much more full training for you sometime in the next probably month or so. And so keep an eye out for that to sign up for one of those available times. But we'll try to do that just to make be efficient with our time and make sure that you have the opportunity to hear all those rules. And in the meanwhile, what I'd recommend for you is take a look at the agency website. There's some policy documents that are posted there concerning the advisory committee policy, which we had sent out previously, and it's included in this packet of material for this meeting. But also there's a document called Expectations for Board Members. And in the advisory committee policy, it says advisory committee members in general should hold to the same standards and policies as board members. There's a few differences, but things like confidentiality, things like integrity, those kind of things should apply to members of both groups. And also start to become familiar with some of the statutes and regulations that are linked on our website. We have sections of the website that are dedicated to the statutes for each of the 6 or 7 professions. So you can take a look at those and start working through them. I don't expect you to read through all of those. There's a lot, but that's a good way that you can start to get familiar with those. And we will talk about a lot of those statutes and regulations at these advisory committee member meetings, because one of the main goals of the advisory committee is to deal with those different topics and then potentially make recommendations back to the board on possible changes. So that's kind of just a basic setup for the 2 big rules, CORA and COMA, and then also a plan for the more training coming up. And then just to let you know, if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to myself and I'll either give you the information you need or connect you to the right person to get that. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dave, unless Elizabeth, unless you have any questions.
Nope, thank you.
Great.
Very good. We'll move on to review and approval of minutes from our meeting on June 4th. Are there any changes to the minutes? If not, I'd accept a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to the executive director's report.
Thank you, Dave. So at each of the board meetings and also at each of the advisory committee meetings, I provide some updates on BSRB operations, any kind of relevant legislative updates, and then also a few notes from the past board meeting or notes from advisory committee meetings if it's to the board. So we'll kind of talk about a few items under each of those categories. Under some operations updates, I did want to let you know the BSRB did receive some positive news this week. There is a national association called the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB, and they came out with an article just about a week ago or so. And the article was titled "Setting the Standard, 10 ASPPB Jurisdictions Leading the Way in a User-Friendly Psychology Licensure Website." And one of the 10 jurisdictions they were highlighting was Kansas and the BSRB website. So we have recently made a change over the last year to make some improvements to our website. We actually have moved to a new vendor for that. And so it looks quite a bit different. But one of our goals was we wanted to make it more user-friendly. We wanted to put some of the really critical information on the front page and have it more accessible for people using their phones, because we know that people are making a transition from accessing a lot of information on desktop computers or laptops to phones. We wanted to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our consumers. And so in that article, it did specifically praise the BSRB for 2 things. It said under the heading reader-friendly features and structured navigation, it complimented the board's website, and also praised the website later under a category of licensing tools and self-service features. So really appreciative for ASPPB recognizing the agency's website. If you see anything on the agency's website that you have recommendations that we can further modify, we're always looking to make improvements and adjustments. So just wanted to highlight that positive feedback from ASPPB. Another big item I wanted to make you aware of, at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about CE Broker. And so Elizabeth, if you have not been following some of the conversation on CE Broker for the last year, the board had contacted a company called CE Broker, which works with licensing boards in Kansas and other states And it provides a free service if you reach an agreement with the e-broker for licensing boards and also licensees. So it provides a portal where licensees can upload documentation they've completed certain continuing education hours. And so the board's agreement with them provided a free account to all licensees under the BSRB. It is not something that is required, but it is a good tool. So I recommend people sign up for it. At the last meeting, we collected some feedback from advisory committee members. If they had used the e-broker, how has their experience been so far? We were scheduling a meeting with the e-broker to try to deliver some of that feedback and figure out if there's changes we can make or improvements to encourage more people to sign up for those services. And I believe in the last meeting, there were some questions about how many people, how many of our licensees are using CE Broker now. So we did implement the CE Broker agreement in 3 phases. We had a lot of meetings behind the scenes with representatives of the company to make sure they understood what our CE requirements were for the 7 professions with the tiered licensure and to make sure what could qualify. And so all the professions had gone live in CE Broker as of January of 2025. In meeting with CE Broker recently, they informed me that between all the professions, and there's about 16,500 licensees under the BSRB currently. Under CE Broker, we have about 1,757 licensees who are actively engaging in the platform. So about 11% adoption rate so far. And you may be wondering, why would a private company provide these services to licensing boards at no cost? Because the agreement we reached with the e-broker was they would provide a free or a base account for anyone who is licensed by the board for free. However, there are higher tiered accounts that people can optionally choose to do, and it does provide some different services like more access to CE classes that are available, and maybe some other tools people would want to voluntarily sign up for. So while the free account is available to everyone, there are some higher tiered accounts that are paid accounts, and enough people voluntarily sign up for the paid account that it makes it worth their time to offer the free accounts to anyone as well. And so, so that adoption rate, the 11%, does include the free account plus anyone who opted into the paid account. And from what I have heard, the people who have opted into the paid account, they have been pleased with the services that they're receiving from CE Broker. So we'll continue to collect feedback. I am hopeful that as we continue to encourage people to sign up for it, we will see a higher adoption rate. One of the things that is really important to the board is that we wanted to make sure this was an optional process. So if for whatever reason, people may not have wanted to sign up for a CE Broker account, they were not required to do so. And what I have seen or heard from people is that some people have not signed up for it, but they are more likely to sign up for it as they are approaching their renewal. Because the goal of CE Broker, it's not just that you have a place where you can store your records versus putting them on a shelf or something. One of the benefits is that if you are utilizing CE Broker to store your records, 10% of our licensees are pulled for audit when they renew their license. And when we audit someone, we check to make sure they are in compliance by meeting all of their CE requirements. So if they're using CE Broker and they've uploaded them to the portal and they've assigned them in different categories, our renewal specialist can log into the portal, verify that the records are there, and then finish the audit very quickly. If they're not using CE Broker, we can do it the traditional way, which involves sending stuff back and forth to the licensing board, but that takes more time. And so this is kind of an efficiency we're trying to offer to more licensees. So like I said, we have about 11% adoption rate so far. Concerning any issues people are having with the system, they informed us that since January, the total number of service tickets for BSRB licensees or BSRB connected individuals is 26. So there have been 19 licensees who have submitted tickets for assistance with one thing or another. And then there were 7 non-licensees. And the reason there's non-licensees, we currently offer pre-approved continuing education for social work. That is the one profession that currently has that. And so we were moving to the portal to allow people to sign up to become a pre-approved provider with social work. And so 7 of those tickets are from those individuals. But for licensees, there were 19 of those since January. What we are ultimately working towards, and this is probably going to be something with our new licensing system we're in the process of moving to, we would like there to be a live link so that when people go to renew their license electronically, they can click a button, and if they are utilizing their CE Broker account, it will look into CE Broker as a live look, and it will say, based on our look into CE Broker, it looks like you have all of your hours completed and you've uploaded documentation. So we will let people continue to move through the renewal, whether they're using CE Broker or not, but that is the end goal, so that people can get a confirmation and feel better about moving through the process of renewal. But like I said, that is not required. If people are not using CE Broker, there would still be the option to do the live link, but it would just say, based on our check of records, we don't see anything for you. You may want to make sure that you have everything you need, but it will still let you process through your renewal. So that's what we're working towards, but we're still a little bit away from that. It'll probably be under the new system, like I said. And the other item under BSRB operations, we have done the surveys for all 7 professions now. We have already started to review the survey reports with most of those professions, but the last group of licensees we were doing the surveys for was social work. And so we did finish those surveys recently, and we have staff summarizing some of that information, and I'm working with them to make sure we have a good report for that. Once we have that draft report for social work, we'll be able to include social work in the overall comparison report, which will be really nice. So that'll be something that we'll be working on here in the near future. Concerning some legislative updates, I did want to make you aware of a recent meeting. There was a House Legislative Committee that is meeting this interim called the House Select Committee on Government Oversight. And they recently had a meeting on July 29th, 2025, and focused on the operations of the Board of Nursing. And I think some of the topics they covered, we want to be mindful of as well, because some of these relates to most licensing boards. They talked a little bit about some of their processes for licensing and renewals and reinstatements, and also allowed some public comment concerning the agency. So we are being mindful of those types of meetings. We did provide a little bit of information in response to a legislative request that was passed out during the meeting. They had surveyed a few different agencies on their processes and then put out a document that included the BSRB, Board of Healing Arts, Dental Board, and I believe Board of Pharmacy. So that was part of the records that were put out there. So I just want to make you aware that meeting did take place. To my knowledge, I'm not aware that they have any other meetings scheduled for that committee, but we'll keep an eye, and if they ask us for any more information, we'll provide it. In terms of updates from the last board meeting, the board met on July 28th, 2025. A lot of the advisory committees have recently been reviewing candidates for recommended new members. And so at the meeting, 9 new advisory committee members were appointed. Marriage and Family Therapy still needs to make recommendations on members, but I think that'll happen this month. And then the Behavior Analyst made recommendations on 1 new member, and so they were planning to make recommendations on a 2nd member this month as well. One of the major topics at the board meetings was background checks for licenses. So currently, the board does not require background checks as a condition of licensure. However, the state of Kansas has passed laws over the last few years to add Kansas to a few different multi-state compacts for some of the professions that are regulated by the board, including the SIPAC compact for licensed psychologists, the professional counseling compact, and the social work compact. And while social work and professional counseling are not yet active, those compacts have not started yet. They're getting close. At least professional counseling is estimated that they would go live sometime later this fall. Social work is probably about a year off based on them needing to do work behind the scenes and choose a data system and things like that. However, one of the big requirements of those compacts is passing a background check as a condition of licensure. So while it is not a requirement in Kansas for licensure, the standard set by those compacts is that background checks would be a requirement of licensure for people wanting to practice under those compacts. And as I've looked for other states, it seems like at least the majority, if not all of our surrounding states, require background checks as a condition of licensure. So I think as more compacts come up, this will continue to be an issue. SIPAC basically said, while it's a requirement of the compact, you have 10 years to come into compliance. However, the Professional Counseling Commission, when they made their rule, they said we will not let anyone practice under the compact unless they've had a background check in connection with licensure. So we don't want our licensees to not be eligible for the compact. So we brought to the board the proposal to start a requirement for background checks. There was a bill that passed a few years back that gave the board the authority to do that, but some of the past discussions of the board have been that weighing the benefit of requiring the background checks versus not wanting any additional fees for licensees. But in this situation, I think our hand is being pushed because of the multi-state compacts and given the public protection mission of the board. So I did bring it to the board as a proposal to require background checks in the near future, and the board was supportive of that. So some states do it in different ways. What the board was in agreement of is starting a background check requirement for the application for initial licensure, for reinstatement when someone's license has expired and there's been a gap from when they practiced previously to when they're coming back and wishing to practice. And then also, most of our applications for initial licensure would include paths for certain licenses, like a temporary license or a provisional license or a permanent license. But we have one category of temporary license, and that is the student temporary addiction counseling license, which is really not involved in a path for a permanent license. It's kind of a separate thing as people are going towards meeting the requirements for an addiction counseling license, but it's not part of that application. So that standalone one, the board also agreed for there to be a background check to make sure that people who are out there practicing have gone through the background check process. And then also the board was supportive of allowing an opt-in method for people who are already licensed to be able to do the background check so that they would be eligible for these compacts. So since the board meeting, I did reach out and met with members of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. KBI has informed us that statutory language on file is sufficient. We also have an agreement behind the scenes as far as verifying that KBI would be able to do these background checks for us. It's just kind of figuring out the logistics of making this a requirement and then figuring out how quickly we can make this go live. Part of this will involve some training for our staff concerning the access to the portal to check the KBI records. There's a standard fee for the background check, which I believe is $57, and that money would all go directly to KBI. So the BSRB might receive that, but it would be a pass-through for the purpose of the background check. So we've kind of worked out most of the details, but we have a few more we still need to figure out to make sure that when we actually go live, we can answer people's questions about this. But we don't want people to be ineligible for the compact when these ones go live. So that was a big thing from the board meeting. Once we have a few more of these details worked out and we're ready to go live, we will definitely provide a lot of information to people because I know people will have questions. But that is the current outlook right now. And then the last item from the board meeting that I wanted to make you aware of as well, your advisory committee, as well as the others, spent a lot of time working on the unprofessional conduct regulations, reviewing those regulations, making recommendations on changes. We put together all of the recommended changes from each of the 7 advisory committees, and then BSRB staff here worked with me to put together a giant grid of all of the 7 professions and have similar items side by side. So the board can review these all together with proposed changes, with also the goal of having some standardization between the language of the different items. And unless there are reasons why there should be differences, the board is going item by item, comparing the language, getting some feedback from legal counsel, with the end goal of being that we would revise all of the unprofessional conduct regulations, hopefully by the end of this year, so that we could put them out for public comment after they've gone through the review process by the Department of Administration and also the Attorney General's office. So that is a big lift by the board at the moment, but it was also a lot of work by the advisory committees as well. But I'm really happy to say how close we are to the end of that project, because I feel like it's very important. And I know it's been really important to the board to make sure that we are revising those and updating those regulations. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions concerning operations, legislative items, board topics, or anything else that maybe I didn't cover in my report.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions?
I'm glad to hear about the background checks. I think I just assumed that was part of the deal. So that gives me a little bit of whoa, but also comfort that it's being addressed.
Yeah, and we have done checks of the National Practitioner Data Bank. And so when there are ways to check for that, we go through that. But in terms of just a general requirement as part of the application process, it isn't not historically been a part of that process as a requirement. So, and like I said, the board is weighing, there's a big push right now for workforce in terms of not wanting to have, a lot of additional requirements unless they're necessary. And definitely we want to be mindful of, the budgetary restrictions that people have in terms of fees and things like that. So we don't want to have any fees unless they're for a very specific purpose. But yeah, as we've been hearing from people and even from the legislature, we do feel support for this item, and especially because of the board's public protection mission. While we want to make sure we're still helping people get out into the field, we want to make sure the public is protected, and if there's things we should know about, we want to make sure that we're doing that due diligence as well.
Any other questions or concerns? All right, seeing none, we'll move to old business. Continued review and discussion on draft survey report of licensees.
Okay, well, for this next item, I'm gonna need your help with this. And we did kind of prep the advisory committee members for this topic at the last meeting, just to kind of frame this item for discussion. During the fall, we talked with each of the advisory committees about wanting to put out a survey to licensees. And this was inspired by some previous surveys we had done for the social work profession, but we wanted to work with the different advisory committees to have a survey for each of the professions. And while we were striving for some uniformity in language, we also realized with tiered licensure, there might be some questions that would be suitable for one profession, but maybe not for the others. And there might be some questions that would be suitable for lower level licenses versus clinical or independent level licenses, and for those that have compacts versus those that don't. And so while there are some differences, we were able to get questions finalized, and that survey was sent out, and we have a report, and those reports are a bit lengthy. And so for the master's level psychology report, the survey report is 75 pages. But part of the reason for that is because some of the questions were multiple choice and some of the questions were open field answers. And we wanted individuals to be able to provide good information to the board. And so how we structured these survey reports is about the first 15 to 20 pages is summary information. It describes the process the board used. It provides information on those multiple choice in the form of a graph. For those that had open field answers, we worked with staff to try to summarize most of the notable responses. But then for individuals who wanted to dig a little bit deeper, for each of the open field answers, we provided an appendices for each of those questions and put that to the back of the report. So while it is 75 pages, you can read the beginning and get a general understanding of what was included in these responses. But then I really appreciate how generous our licensees were with their feedback and their time answering these questions. And I think you can really get a lot more detail when you read through those open field responses. We didn't want to lose the voice of the people who answered some of those questions. And so at the last meeting, we asked advisory committee members to focus on 2 specific questions to be ready to discuss for this meeting, because we realized 75 pages is a lot to talk about at any meeting. And so we said for this meeting, focus on 2 of those questions. One was basically, over the last 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observation of other practitioners? And then the second question was, over the last 2 years, have you experienced any negative issues involving supervision? And we were able to divide our survey responses. So in the survey report, you have responses first from the LMLPs, the licensed master's level psychologist, and then you also have separately responses from the licensed clinical psychotherapist. So for the purpose of sort of this part of the meeting, maybe we can go to that first question that dealt with, have you experienced any issues based on your observations and experience practicing in the master's level psychology profession? Could you share information on any practice related negative issues you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appear to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? And maybe we can start with this with going to the LMLP responses first. And then after you've had a chance to discuss those responses, we can move to the LCP responses. So at this point, I'll just open it up. I have a few notes myself, but I would prefer if some of you kind of have the initial reflections, and then I'll try to supplement that with some comments that I made during my review as well. So looking at question 13 for the LMLPs, specifically the response for the LMLPs first. I'll turn it over to all of you and just tell me what takeaways or what things stood out as you looked through the summary information and also the information in the appendices in the back. And feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and just kind of jump in as you want to share comments. And I don't see anybody jumping in. Would you like me to share my comments first and then maybe supplement those? Okay, I'll go ahead and get the process started here. As I was looking through the LMLP responses, we did have 96 individuals who responded to that question. And one thing that I thought was interesting was about 39% of individuals who answered this question basically said that they did not see any areas where people appeared to need more training. And so I never want to bypass positive information. I think it's really easy to just kind of overlook something like that. But I think it's notable that about 39% had the opportunity to highlight any areas where people needed more education or training. And they basically said no, they don't think that there are, at least based on their observations or training. So that's great in terms of those individuals. But we do also want to look at any other issues that were highlighted. So while I don't want to overlook the positive or the feedback there, I did see a few issues that people had noted. One appeared to be maybe individuals not being as educated or trained on the topic of telehealth as maybe they could be. Another item that I saw pop up a few times in different responses had to do with suicide prevention training or topics related to suicide. Another one talked about addiction and maybe some addiction specific training or treatment. And then I also noted some issues that were identified, which kind of, in my opinion, focused on recognition of the master's level psychology license, and then also what may be able to be performed. And some of the groups that I thought I saw referenced here were maybe some confusion or lack of clarity by employers, maybe individuals from other states, and then also maybe some issues as it relates to the license concerning reimbursement and dealing with insurance companies. So that is one thing that we are working on in other ways, is putting more of a spotlight on the master's level psychology profession and trying to help people understand a little bit more about our tiered licensure and the education and training that master's level psychologists undergo. But those are the topics that stood out to me when I was going through. Turn it back over to you. Did anything else stand out to you, or did you notice kind of the same issues that I had highlighted?
Dave, I had a question. I noticed legal was a area that came up, kind of training in legal areas. I wondered about the jurisprudence training that you have been talking about putting together. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, and I think, we had talked a little bit about, we're collecting this data and what's the goal, because maybe there's issues that are highlighted the BSRB may be able to be helpful with, and maybe some that we can't be. And so there may be some areas that cross over into what someone should really consult with their legal counsel to understand or address. But there are some other states that have a jurisprudence examination that is a separate examination required for licensure, and it focuses on state-specific policies, procedures, or laws. And for states that have a jurisprudence exam requirement, that is something that their licensees have to pass to make sure that they are knowledgeable about the state-specific rules. And Kansas does not currently require a jurisprudence exam, but in our analysis of whether that would be something we could move forward on, the issue was, the fee for administering that examination. Also, some states either create it themselves or they outsource it to a private company. But to create that exam and then to administer it, that third party does the fee as well. And so we didn't really want to charge any fees to licensees if we could avoid that cost. but we also saw the need to help people understand more of these state-specific rules. So our proposal to the board, and the board was supportive of this, was to design a series of free webinars to do quarterly to focus on the same topics that a jurisprudence exam would cover. So at the last meeting, we asked for some volunteers on this, and we're still working on putting that process together, but I think that will address some of the BSRB specific rules and maybe some of the really specific statutes and regulations that we can help people become more knowledgeable about. Where I think we might run into a little bit of an issue is as it relates to interpretation of the unprofessional conduct regulations. We can't definitively say if this happens, this will be the outcome that you will see, because each one of the complaints that the board receives is a case by case type of a thing with different facts. And there could be different items that people could add in response to a scenario. So while we want to make sure that people are mindful of the language in some of those rules, I probably would not be able to present it as, if you do this, here's what's going to happen, and here's going to be the penalty. It's more of what are the requirements in law, and then what does the language actually say? And so that'll be kind of a line that we'll have to walk and be very careful to be mindful and make sure people understand that. But I think in terms of the specific language, the rules, a lot of that we can cover, and I think it'll be a real nice benefit to licensees. So our plan is still to make that live this fall, and I think that will address some of the concerns about some of the items that were mentioned. I'm hoping we can also take this report and share it maybe with some of the schools and just get some feedback from them that we've talked with licensees out in the field. And here's what licensees in the field are identifying as areas where more training or education could be beneficial. So, Iris, I saw that you unmuted. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do have some comments. First, just on the license not being recognized. I know I've brought this up before, but one thing kind of going into my own like MPI information and CAQH information, I think I've brought this up before, just filling out any applications, but those two specifically, which are big ones, because you have to do those to get credentialed under anything. They don't have any master level psych listed under either of those. So I'm just curious what everybody marks on those. I mean, the only options are psychologist, counselor, family therapy. There's no options. And those are the two biggest, I mean, we have to do those to get credentialed. So I don't know if the BSRB could be involved in talking to them or how we would go about that being recognized, but that's how we get credentialed. But there's no box for us to mark. So we have to mark a box that really doesn't apply, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Iris, could you tell me the two that you had highlighted again? Which were those two?
MPI, the national provider number that you have to have, and then CAQH, which I can't remember. Anybody remember exactly what that stands?
It's been a while. I mean, it's been a good decade probably since I've done it.
Right.
But I do vaguely recall, I feel like hours on the phone trying
Mhm.
to explain myself,
Yep.
explain my Kansas license and explain my education, and then the people on the other end just checking the boxes for me. Like,
Mhm.
that's good enough. Like I
Yep.
don't I think and then, but this isn't, I'm not this or this. Like I
Right.
do I remember having this struggle of I don't know how to handle this. Even now with insurance companies, they don't seem to know, what are you? Like we don't have that as an option. So it's
Right.
continued to be challenging.
Yeah.
And I
I
don't know how
just
to handle it. Yeah.
I happen to kind of come across it because I'm trying to do a little bit of private practice on the side. And so I got back into mine and I was like, oh, this is not good.
I
Um,
I think what I did was just reading descriptions of what I was doing or maybe the clientele I was planning to work. I can't remember like how I resolved this box, that box, but I think there were specific descriptions for each one. I don't know if that's still the thing.
It is,
Okay.
but you have to make sure those match up too, and
For sure.
sometimes they don't, and so then they won't credential you if those don't
Yeah.
match up. But I've talked to our credentialing specialist here, but it just seems like I don't know how many states have the same level we do. If we could get on board with the states that do, to at least get with the NPI people and CAQH, it would help. So that was just my feedback on that. But on the areas of like addiction, especially what I noticed with clinicians coming out of school, like they don't tend to have classes in addiction at all. Even myself, I remember coming out of school not having much of anything in addiction. So what I've gotten in addiction has been just through years of experience and additional trainings that I've gotten. And I'm getting ready to study for the LCAC test, and even just the years of experience, I still am feel like, yeah, there's a lot to know in that area. It's so, yeah, certainly people with a few years, I can see how they feel ineffective, but that addiction, I mean, it is so prevalent in so much of the population that we see, especially in community mental health, that I can see providers feeling very ineffective and not knowing what they're doing. Same with some of the other areas, like with autism, I see that also in community mental health with clinicians coming out of school. Just in general with seeing kids, they don't have a lot of kid focus. And so they're like, I don't know how to diagnose that. I don't know how to assess for it. I don't know how to treat it. So we have to do a lot of training, just in general with kids. And trauma and autism. And yes, same with suicide. They don't have a lot of exposure. So if you are a newer clinician in the field, that just you've got to have additional training. A lot of times just your schooling doesn't completely prepare you for all those topics that you see out there.
Thanks, Iris. That's really
Yeah.
good feedback.
I think that's partly why I worry so much about these other professions that are getting temporary license for LMLP without any clinical classes, or, I mean, because and I agree with you, like what you learn in school is just like scratching the surface, and then you have to learn by either having a really good supervisor or being in the field. So, and then you have to have a job that gives you the time to take the coursework or to take the trainings or to help you pay for it. So I would agree with what you had to say.
Thanks, Rebecca.
The diagnosing part and the assessments and treating it, that definitely stood out. But then also like the court testimony and the ethical concerns and ethical trainings, especially dealing with social situations and current issues. That seemed to come up a lot too.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Any other comments on the LMLP section? Well, maybe we can move to the LCP responses. 103 individuals, I believe, responded, and about 46 mentioned no practice-related issues that they could highlight. But some of the items that I saw on that included some of the same familiar topics, the issues with diagnosing, maybe some of the difficulty with testing, at least for new practitioners, suicide prevention, again. There was a note there that perhaps it would be helpful if there was more frequent communication from the BSRB, maybe quarterly. We are working to develop a newsletter. We do post information on the website, As outreach, we've, sort of been broadcasting our meetings for the board and advisory committees now for almost 5 years. And we go and talk to groups of students, put more of a spotlight on it. And with our survey, we were trying to highlight some of the other resources available to people. We've even done a couple of special meetings, one for employers and one for educators, usually sometime around September. We started doing those about 2 years ago, and we've had forums that have included about 40 to 50 people. But you know what? If we're still hearing from people that they would like more communication, I like to hear that, and I accept the challenge. And so happy to share more information. And I do think one of the comments too was that some people see the BSRB as very strict in terms of the regulations and requirements. And while those are in law and we have to be strict on some of those things, that doesn't necessarily mean that our approach should feel that way. And I think we have tried to make sure that we offer good customer service when people call our office or when we help them with things. And so I am all in favor of having more resources available to people and having more opportunities for them to become educated on different things. So I think as part of this jurisprudence, I think we've thought about having some little unofficial commercials during some of those jurisprudence questions to kind of say, oh, well, we're waiting people to log in. Let me tell you a little bit more about the e-broker that the board is partnered with. Make sure you're aware of this is a resource for you. And then while we're also waiting for move between this question and that question, let's remind people about the advisory committees. And here's when they are, but you don't have to watch them live. They're also archived, so you can go back and watch them. That is something that is a little rare. Some of the other agencies around the state, when they broadcast their meetings, they will broadcast them, but you have to watch them live. And so we've really tried to make it a little bit more accessible with the archiving of the resources. And so yeah, we will take some feedback on that and try to figure out some more solutions. Any other comments from some of you on the LCP comments from that section of the report? Well, if not, oh, go ahead, Rebecca. I saw you.
Well, I mean, it says trainings, and there's a lot of that. And I keep thinking to like, well, what am I doing? Well, I feel like one of the most powerful ways that I learn in this field is by like talking to you guys. And so I don't know if there would be a way to like have somewhere like, well, Lauren feels really strong with her work in trauma, and Jennifer feels really strong with her work with autism. And if I have a question about one of those things, I don't know if it was just like I mean, I'm in Wichita and there's a lot of people here, but I don't know who to call when I have a question about a personality disorder or who I can refer to. Like some things like that, I think would be a little bit helpful to where I don't have to be trained in everything. I can just know who to talk to or who to refer to. I think that would help ease some of the concerns of we're not trained in all of these things because we can't be expected to be the expert in all of it. But if I could get online and look at, if I don't know if that's something the BSRB could do of, this person is considered very comfortable in this area. I don't know if the expert's the right word, but just kind of a list of people's expertise or what their comforts are, what they work a lot with. That might ease some of the fears of I've not had training in this. Now what do I do? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's interesting. Lauren, I saw that you unmuted too. Do you have a comment?
I was just going to say that makes me feel, it conjures up what I sort of imagine to be like right? We had clinical supervision early on in our careers. And I kind of see a place for that. Like once you're established in like a group of other professionals, I think that's hard, right? Because that eats into people's time. Because really that would just be us volunteering to like once a month on the first Tuesday at 6 p.m., we'd get on together and have clinical supervision. And it would be such a beautiful thing to offer people at all different stages of their licensure and just sharing of clinical ideas. I'm not sure I see that as a BSRB function. Maybe it could be something we survey and find out, like, do people want that bad enough to give their time away? Or is it something we want when we're filling out surveys? But if the hour or 2 hours is coming from like evening pocket, people are feeling such a squeeze with work-life balance.
people have to actually come to it and share the ideas. And I think it's very easy to get excited about that during business hours. But for it to work, it sort of has to be after we're done seeing patients and at the end of the day. And I wonder how we get the best of both worlds in that.
You know, one thing that struck me, this type of a resource, it does sound a little bit more like something that an association might offer or at least coordinate with. And I think that's one of the challenges of master's level psychology, because some of the other professions, you know, there's a little bit more uniformity across states. And with master's level psychology, only about 17 states right now license at the master's level. The terminology is different. You know, not every state has tiered licensure. So the scope of practice and even what people practicing under this profession are called is different. However, you know, there is a state level association, and I'm not trying to volunteer them for anything, but I do know from time to time they host conferences, and they've invited me to present at a previous conference. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to start a conversation with that group to see if maybe we can work together, see if there's any interest there. Because I do think, yeah, there's a question of whether or not this would cleanly fit under the role of the BSRB. You know, I don't know that we would be able to really recommend certain providers for certain services, because that kind of gets into some tricky areas there. But I think if we can coordinate with an association to maybe be supportive, maybe that's a thought as a direction we could have a conversation with them. And if that's not the right approach, maybe there's something else we can consider. But part of this is identifying issues or problems, and then the next step is maybe looking at solutions. And so we're kind of putting a lot of stuff on the table. And that's one of the nice things about being able to kind of walk through this with some time, because we can really get into a lot of the feedback we got from everyone. Well, let's go to the second question that we asked everyone to review, and that focuses on supervision. And so the question, as it dealt with supervision, said, you know, over the past 2 years, have you experienced any negative issues involving supervision? That was question 15 for the LMLPs and question 16 for the LCPs. And we did break it out between the responses for each group. So for the LMLPs, there were about 102 responses, and I think if my notes are correct, I think about 85 individuals noted that they did not have anything to report in terms of negative responses concerning supervision, which to me is a really positive sign. You know, I do know that there are some issues that were highlighted by other individuals, but I think it's really positive that it looks like over 80% of the respondents said, at least from their experience, supervision has gone well, or they have nothing that they could report recently concerning any negative issues there. So don't want to overlook that. But in terms of some of the negative issues that were noted, I think a few individuals noted the cost of supervision. Some people noticed availability of supervisors. I think at least one person talked about lack of availability, specifically as it relates to people in a close geographic region. And that did make me think about something. We had a professional counseling advisory committee that met on Monday, and some of the responses there appeared to show that some people were not aware that all supervision could be done by televideo. And that is something that is relatively recent, and that is something that I think some people may not all be aware of, that you can do that. There may still be a preference to do in-person supervision, but maybe this is another area that we can spotlight as part of the jurisprudence process to see and make sure people are aware that all supervision could be done by televideo. And there may be some people, some other states, they did a temporary change to allow that because of the pandemic. And then when things were getting back to normal, they reverted back to their previous rules. I think it was the conversation of the board that things were fast-tracked to allow a lot of things by televideo because of the pandemic. But in general, the responses that the board received for things like supervision by televideo were mostly positive. So it really has been a positive aspect that came out of that time period. And so another item the way I just summarized one of these items is perhaps there were a few unfortunate pairings, maybe based on styles, or some people may have had a specific negative experience with one particular supervisor or another. And so there were a few of those that were noted, but I'm curious if any of you had takeaways as you were looking through the summary information or the individual open answer responses from people for the LMLPs first.
I think the thing that stood out to me the most was where they were talking about power struggles within supervision. I know that could be a lot of things, but that really kind of stood out to me.
Thank you,
I
Sarah.
think I wish there was a way that this is just me thinking through this because I experienced this with my other license. You know, if there was a way to identify who wants to be supervisors. So, you know, when we have to apply for our license every 2 years, if there was a way to mark on there if we wanted to be a supervisor for somebody, and if so, then we would have to complete training on supervision. I know some licenses require, like, if you want to be a supervisor, that you have to do so many hours of supervision CEUs and report that. And so, and a lot of those supervision trainings are how to be an effective supervisor, how to manage your staff, but promote good, you know, good things. And so I'm just thinking through that, like if we have people that want to be a supervisor, that we would require that.
Yeah, good comments.
I think one of the things that stood out to me were people talking about the cost. And then also the other side of it is there's not enough. But I wonder too if there's a way to regulate how much is being charged. And if you don't want to be in that price range, then maybe it's not for you. Or also if there could be a trade-off, like if you're going to do the standard amount of whatever it is an hour, then you would get more hours for CEs, like the credit for being a supervisor, like doing it in trade for that. But I mean, also like regulation, more regulation isn't going to get you more supervisors. So that's kind of two-folded there. I understand. But also the price being an issue, like I don't want somebody not to have supervision just because they can't afford it. That doesn't seem like a whole lot of equity there if we're going to require that you have to have supervision, but then you also get priced out of the market because you just can't afford it.
Yeah, good comments there. Those are definitely things that other states are talking about and considering. I have seen some recent questions on listservs that have asked, does your state have any statutes or regulations on cost controlling the cost of supervision? And the vast majority of responses that I have seen just off the top of my head were no, that most of the states don't have anything specific in statute or regulation. It really just kind of comes down to the supervisor and supervisee to work out an agreement. But to your point, you know, you brought up some really good things. You know, that's really difficult for some people to pay the cost if it's too high. On the other hand, trying to regulate something like this would be very challenging in certain conditions too. So, Iris, go ahead.
No, just one more thing. So it kind of parrots or piggybacks on what we talked about before, but if there was a way when we renewed, we could even click a button that says, hey, I want to be on the list of BSRB that I'm licensed and I'm in this area and these are the groups that I work with. And yes, I would want to do supervision, or no, I don't want to do supervision. So then if somebody just wanted to go, like they don't have the resources or they're in private practice and they want to look, they could pull up that category of the 16,000 people we have, and 9,000 of them have said, yes, I'll be in this directory of, and these are people that work with kids, or these are people that work with the geriatric population, or these are people that work in schools. And that's a quicker way to find them.
Yeah, so that's a really good comment. We have talked about that at a board level, and I think in the advisory committees as well. And I think the board is supportive of that. We've talked about including an extra question on the renewal application. We're not quite there yet, but people have asked, you know, do you have a list of everybody who's currently supervising? And for two of the professions, professional counseling and marriage and family therapy, there's board approved supervisors, so we can give them a list of those people. But for the other professions, we have a general idea of who's eligible to provide supervision, but not necessarily who is wanting to provide supervision or who's currently providing supervision. So that is something definitely we can take a look at.
I do really like the idea of having a directory. On the registered play therapy, they have an option for that. And so there's like an option to to check mark that. And if you provide it via televideo or live or both. And then also I was going to bring up, a way to do it cost effectively, which I've always really loved too, is like a group supervision, which you should be able to do it way cheaper too. And you can get so much more out of it. I've always loved doing their supervision in a group setting. That can be really helpful and would be way cheaper for folks too. I can't remember exactly how many hours they can get that way, but I don't think hardly anybody is getting any group supervision hours anymore. So that would be another, because I would definitely be willing to do that too.
Any other comments on the LMLP section of the supervision question? Let's go ahead and touch on the LCP responses. There were 110 responses, and similar to the LMLP, quite a few individuals responded no, that they did not have any, the double negative, but they had no negative experiences to report. And so about 88%, I think, is what, or 88 individuals of 110 did not identify negative issues. Several did say they don't provide supervision. So that was one of the things that did come up. We did ask people recently in the last 2 years. So if they are not providing supervision and they've been practicing independently, they may have no direct involvement with supervision. You can't necessarily read into it that everything has been positive. They just may have no current knowledge of that topic as it relates to active supervision. There was an item that I did see highlighted, and that was a couple of instances to where supervisees were not able to pass the EPPP at that level. And I think licensing examinations is a topic that's relevant for each of the professions. I know it's gotten a lot more attention recently for some of the professions like social work, where they've really done a deep dive into determinants of success on examinations and things like test anxiety and different things like that. I thought that was really interesting as I'm kind of tracking that information for that profession.
Or even test fatigue. So I will take that test in October. And so they even move from 4 multiple choice questions to 3 because it's a time limited test. And so there was no reason to have that extra distractor. And so they had evidence that based that. So they moved their test to only have 3 multiple choice questions instead of 4, which is super interesting. And I don't know how often the EPPP is actually changed or moved, and said it just kind of feels like everyone's forced to endure it and either sink or fail at a really high price.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah, and, from what their conversations have been on the shift from 4 to 3, they basically said that nobody was picking that 4th response. It seems like people could always rule out that last one. So getting rid of that question really didn't change the psychometric analysis of whether it was a valid test or not. What it really came down to was when you have that many questions and a limit on time, for certain people, reading that 4th option for every question turned it into a little bit of a speed reading test. And so if nobody was picking that question and you could easily eliminate it, why not just have them pick between 3? And so that was part of one of the things that they looked at and have started to implement. I'm not sure if all those questions are live now, because it seems like they need to put some of them through as practice or unofficial questions first before they become live in future tests, but they are making that transition. For the EPPP, there has been the recent conversation of, should states be required to have their applicants pass both the EPPP and then also the EPPP2. And that initially was going to be a requirement as determined by the ASPPB board. This was not something that states had the opportunity to opt into, or they could have voluntarily required it, but this was going to be something that was imposed on all states, and there was a number of states that basically stood up to that, including Kansas last year. We spoke against that being an arbitrary requirement, and ultimately the board of ASPPB withdrew that as a requirement. They changed their mind and they said, let's create a new task force and let's look into this, and so we can have one examination how it had been described was that the EPPP was more of a knowledge-based test. The EPPP2 was more of a skills-based assessment. And for some states that had previously had an oral examination that could be seen as too subjective, the EPPP2 was intended to replace that as more of a non-biased assessment of skills. But for states that didn't have that, it was very easy to look at it as a second test that would be required for licensure. And if you didn't pass both of them, you wouldn't be able to practice. So there was an additional cost. There were additional concerns about barriers to licensure. And then also, was this being done to really solve a harm? And while it would make things potentially better by having people more knowledgeable about different things, is it really necessary at a time where workforce is really an issue? So thankfully, we were able to persuade the board of ASPPB not to make that a requirement when they originally were thinking about that. And that task force has been meeting this year to work on integrating components of both tests into one test for the future. I'm not sure that they have set a firm date on when the new version of the EPPP will be released, but it should include components of both. I don't know when that's going to come out, but there should be some news later this year, at least at the annual meeting for ASPPB about that. So, any other comments about supervision or about, the things that we had talked about as it relates to the survey?
Dave, I had just a comment on another part of the report, which had to do with respondents' familiarity with the advisory committees. And yeah, it was really, really low in terms of those people who were kind of very familiar with what the advisory committees did, and wondered about ways that we could make sure people, I know you, since instituting the recordings and putting them on YouTube, they've been viewed a lot, but the survey would still seem to indicate that there's the vast majority of licensees who aren't familiar with what the advisory committees do.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dave. And one of the reasons why we included a survey question on the report, just including that question and having it go in front of all the licensees, was kind of to put a spotlight on the fact that the advisory committee meetings are broadcast. When there have been openings in the past on the advisory committee, we had previously sent out, a message to licensees that described the work of the advisory committee and if you want to serve. And over the last few years, we've included more information about that, noting the YouTube channel and kind of trying to put a little bit of a spotlight. But I still think, there's a lot of people that identified in the survey as just having very little familiarity with the advisory committee or the work of the advisory committee. And so we are trying to talk about that with students. When we do meetings with students, we say, we do a presentation, Leslie and myself, the assistant director. We talk to students and we walk through with about 45 minutes of a presentation where we help them understand the role of the BSRB and our requirements by the legislature to regulate the professions and help them become licensed. And then we walk through how to apply for licensure. And then we also cover the unprofessional conduct regulations, because we say, as you are moving towards becoming a professional, we want you to be aware of the expectations that will be on you in terms of getting complaints filed. And the BSRB's role is also to investigate those complaints and how you should approach those. And we always share with people that, as a practitioner, you can't control if someone's going to file a complaint against you. What you can control is how you respond to that. And we encourage people to respond professionally, because we say there are some instances where someone has a complaint filed against them. We followed up for more information and they never responded back to the board. And that led to a lot more problems for them because of, not complying with an investigation. So we talk about just making sure people have the right mindset as they're getting ready to become a professional. But we also say, the advisory committees are meeting every other month. This is a great opportunity for you to hear from licensees the items that are being discussed. We bring back items from the national level for licensees to discuss and then forward recommendations to the board. So as you're about to become a professional in this area, this is a great opportunity for you to hear some of these discussions. And before we started broadcasting meetings, what I had heard from staff, because I started about the same time that we started broadcasting the meetings, one of the first things that I did as executive director, it started the YouTube channel. So we were broadcasting meetings. But that was about 5 years ago. And before that, what I've heard is over the course of a year, the in-person meetings had maybe at most a combined 10 in-person attendees. And so since we have been broadcasting the meeting, over the 5 years, we've put up over 200 meetings on the YouTube channel. They've been viewed over 11,000 times. I think on average, the advisory committee meetings are viewed about 40 times, although some have been much higher. And so we do try to get the information out. We know that more people are following the work of the advisory committees and the work of the board. But I agree with you 100%, Dave. There's still room for us to be helping people get more connected to it. And it's a choice, there's definitely other ways to spend available time. But I do want to make sure that people, if they want to track this information and they want to be knowledgeable about it, that those tools are available to them. We've posted a lot of information on the website. We've tried to make it user-friendly for people to navigate to different things for different meetings. But I still want to make sure that people know, if you want to know what's going on, if you want to have the opportunity for input, this is a great forum for that, where you can request time for public comment on a certain topic, or you can maybe send a message and say, has the advisory committee talked about this topic recently, or, are there plans for this to be discussed? And then we can try to help coordinate some of those things too. Anything more on the supervision question or today's question about the note about the advisory committees? Well, it is interesting. When we first started broadcasting these meetings of the advisory committee, somebody would say something during a meeting and then say, is it okay if I share that with someone? And I would say, of course, because this meeting is broadcast, this is on YouTube, and so everybody can view this. And so, but it was a nice transition. We had people from the associations come to these meetings and then talk about things like the licensing examination or talk about other topics. And then we were able to refer those to people. So if people missed a meeting, we could also say, you can go back and view the meeting. And so it's a nice way to connect people with all the information. But for maybe for the next meeting, if this process sounds good to you to continue to go through the report, maybe we could also select 2 questions that we can follow up on at the next meeting. And I've got a couple in mind, unless you have suggestions for questions for future meetings. But the 2 questions that I was going to highlight that we've asked the professional counseling advisory committee to focus on, so we could try to sync up all the advisory committees to look at the same topics in these months of meetings. If you could focus on a question that dealt with the topic of artificial intelligence. I think that is question number 16 for the LMLPs and question 17 for the LCPs. That question says, do you currently use artificial intelligence, AI, in your practice? And if you do, in what areas do you use AI? And then the other question I thought would be good to focus on for the next would be, there was a question that dealt with telehealth. And so while people have mentioned that under other categories, there was one dedicated specifically to telehealth, and it says this is question number 14 for both groups of licensees. And it said, over the last 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? And so if you could take a look at the summary information for both the telehealth question and the AI question, and then in between this and the next meeting in a couple of months, and then come back ready to discuss that information, that would be helpful. That would make sure that we're moving forward and going through all this information, but that it's not too much for us to be able to discuss at any one meeting.
All right, thank you, Dave. Next old business is continued discussion on regulation of artificial intelligence.
So this may be something we can get into in more detail at the next meeting, but this has kind of been an ongoing topic for discussion. Originally something the board discussed, and then thought it might be helpful to defer this to the advisory committees. So each advisory committee could approach this from the perspective of their profession. Some of the conversations we've had so far have been, in general, when looking at AI, there is whether to regulate AI itself or to regulate practitioners' conduct as it relates to if you're using AI. And one of the things that the advisory committees have discussed has been if you are using AI, to make sure that you have informed consent from your clients, to make sure that they are aware that you are using AI. The second thing that has come up in discussions has been making sure you're preserving confidentiality if you're using any kind of AI tools, knowing if that's a closed AI, if it's not, where the information is going, because you are, as a practitioner, responsible for preserving certain confidential information and making sure that it doesn't get out there. There has been some dialogue at a federal level concerning whether or not states have the ability to regulate artificial intelligence or not. We're still kind of working through that issue as it relates to federal laws, but at least on the state level, one authority that is under the BSRB would be regulating the conduct of practitioners. So as we look at whether AI itself can and should be regulated, the conduct of licensees is still under the board's jurisdiction. So as it relates to unprofessional conduct, that's kind of what we talked about so far. But I think maybe we can get into this topic a little bit more after the next meeting when we look into those survey responses.
Very good. All right, that takes us to new business, discussion on alternative pathway for licensure.
And Dave, this was a topic that was originally discussed at the board meeting. So as it relates to this discussion, one of the alternative pathways to licensure we were looking at was potentially a pathway to licensure that may not involve passage of a licensing examination. And so this was something the board talked about and deferred to the advisory committees for each of the advisory committees to have a discussion on that. As it relates specifically to master's level psychology, as I mentioned, 17 states regulate licensed master's level psychology in one form or another. There is a lack of uniformity about that. I did attempt to gather some information ahead of the meeting, but so far I've been unsuccessful with that. I reached out to a couple of contacts, one who had served on a task force for ASPPB looking at master's level psychology licensure with the intent of trying to provide some guidance or recommendations on standardizing the requirements for that. I was hopeful that maybe that task force had put together a grid or a report on current requirements for licensure, but I haven't heard back about that. And I also reached out to the member of the ASPPB staff on the research committee to see if perhaps they also had information about this topic, but I have not received that as well. I just wanted to bring this back so you could have an informed conversation about this. I did ask Leslie a little bit if she can recall why the independent level or the clinical level of professional or master's level psychology, the LCP license, why the pass point on that is 500 for the EPPP. And she informed me that based on what she can recall, ASPPB basically, when they are talking about the independent practice of psychology, that is the point where they had recommended a 500 level for the EPPP. So it had to do with practicing psychology independently versus being under supervision. Now, as it relates to our LMLP level of permanent licensure, the task force, at least their, I don't know if these were the ultimate recommendations, but what they had reported at some of the meetings concerning their discussion was that their initial thought was that the master's level psychology pass point should be 450, which does not match our current level of 400. But then again, you know, states have different, and a lot may not license master's level psychology. So that's a bit more open, I think, in terms of the level that would be practicing under supervision. So, but I did want to report back to you what I have so far. And I'll turn it back over to you, Dave, but I was hoping to have a little bit more information about what other states have as requirements for licensure, if any of those states have pursued an alternate pathway, but unfortunately I don't have that information today.
Appreciate that update, Dave. You know, I think we've seen that some folks, for whatever reason, can't pass the EPPP. It's good to have an objective measure of what people, their kind of foundational information, but we all know people who could be really good clinicians, but test taking isn't a strength of theirs for one reason or another. And so looking for a mechanism by which they too could get licensed, whether that's through longer supervision, additional supervision, practice in a particularly kind of controlled environment, or more time spent doing the kind of work with a supervisor so that somebody could attest to the fact that they have the skills to be able to practice independently. That's really kind of what we're talking about here. So would welcome the opportunity for you all to have input. If not, we'll continue this discussion once Dave gets some more information from what other states are doing.
I feel like, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but, and I can't remember who said the specifics of what's popping in my mind right now, but the objectability of the test is, I don't want to say comforting, but it's like if we were to open it up and someone who didn't pass or didn't pass at a certain level, I mean, I know it's expensive and I know it's a beast, but the subjective nature of that would make me very nervous for our profession, because I mean, I know some people would be great, but I also know some supervisors that would think, oh yeah, sure, I'll sign there, and not pay as much attention to what they're doing. If that makes sense, I think it would make me nervous if it was open to more of a subjective way about it. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm too, somebody else can add
You know,
something if you want.
I
That's
don't
just my
think
view.
you're, I
Yeah.
don't think you're off base, because I think it's not until I'm doing clinical supervision with someone in which I'm really able to decide if I'd want to sign my name to that. And that's not exactly what we're describing either, because it's completely separate from your clinical supervision, and you might not even be getting any clinical supervision.
Right,
You're not
right.
working towards the advanced licensure. And so I worry for those with the LMLP level, we could water it down to the point where we're going in the wrong direction with NPI and payers.
Right.
I mean, that would be what I'd worry most, is I don't want to water us down to the point where we're not reimbursable for additional things, since that seems to be a big sort of concern of our discipline as it stands current state.
And I think that's like maybe going back to what we talked about before, but having like specific standards, or supervisors have to take a certain course road to get certified to be a supervisor for maybe not just clinical, but like the alternative path. Maybe that's a completely different type of supervision, where the supervisor has to meet those training standards to do that. I know for me, I had my LMLP, and the main reason why was because I was doing my LCMFT at the same time, and I couldn't find a supervisor. Of course, this was back in like 2002. Could not find a supervisor anywhere. And it was just easier just to keep doing my LCMFT. And I've just honestly never looked back because of licensure or reimbursement from insurance companies. It's just easier to get reimbursed with the LCMFT. But I honestly still crave more from my LMP. I keep it. I love that aspect. I love the licensure of the LMLP. And it kind of looms over here that I don't have my clinical. And so, I do. I think that alternative, like if we're going to do an alternative, we need to have some form of objective or some type of rubric that needs to be there to keep the licensure credible.
I was just thinking that, looking at the surveys, some of the feedback was that other disciplines, particularly doctorate psychologists, don't take us seriously or at that level. And if we say, we no longer need that test to measure somebody for the LCP license, that may backfire in our face. And so, while I'm open to thinking other things, because I also took that test and I hated it, but eventually over time I passed it. But I could see how that would be a hardship for a lot of people to take that. And there's multiple revisions, having to learn all those and buy the testing stuff. So it is hard, but like we're talking about, we need something that's objective because we want our discipline to be taken seriously by others. And to do that, I think we need to find a very objective, reasonable way to do that.
I think it'd be interesting too. I have lots of thoughts about the ETRP, but the fact that we have to do the LPC, you have to have a 500, which is the same score that you would need if you come out as a doctorate level. However, if you have people that are super close to that, but then they can go ahead and practice as an LMLP, there's no real incentive to keep going or go take the test again, because if you work in community mental health in some areas, you may not even make enough to even justify taking the test again. But if I've been in the field and I had a pretty good score, I just didn't have a 500, and I've been in the field and I've shown that I can do what I need. Like if there was you've been in the field for 5 years, and if that's still the track you want to do, and you had over like a 450, could you apply for an LPC at that point? Like I've kind of proved myself, if that makes sense. I don't know why I would have to prove myself on the test again. Does that make sense? Like, so if there was that, so yes, the standard, like if you want to go straight for your LPC and it's a 500 and you wanted to leave that, but if you wanted to look at an alternative track where if you did have a certain score that's like 450 or 475, whatever that number would be, and you've been in the field for X number of years, you've kind of shown your colors in that what you've been able to do, and then you could apply for that alternative certificate that way. Because I think you have a lot of people that are at the LMLP level that may have looked at going at, but maybe they didn't hit that 500, but they did have an okay score and they're still out here, but we can't do supervision. We can't do those things. We're still out here kind of in the wind because of a number that nobody really knows now why we picked that number.
I've often used the EPPP as a tool when explaining the difference between a doctoral level and a master's level psychologist. It's been helpful to help other people understand what we do, to say that it's a master's level psychologist that has passed the EPPP at the doctoral level. There's something about that sentence that I love, the idea that if we weren't going to have that sentence be true anymore, we'd have, like you said, really clear pathway that you've shown yourself in these areas, and it's not an EPPP, but there's some other like very structured way that the BSRB can help identify those humans. So to your point, right, we've got more people providing clinical supervision, and there's already not enough. But it's like, how would we define that in a less objective way? I mean, I've heard a lot of really good ideas. I think that's something that could be built. Do you guys feel like it would take away from our ability to sort of explain the discipline in that way? How might we otherwise explain it? Would it be like we the master's level psychologists who passed the EPPP at not the doctoral level, but did 5 years? I don't know. That becomes harder. If people already knew what LMLPs were, I feel like that would be an easy explanation. But it's the world, even in Kansas, I'm explaining what an LMLP versus LCP is so often. It's hard.
I think if we, like you mentioned, take away the test number, I also use the same. I mean, LCPs have to pass at that doctoral level. Makes sense, why they're at that clinical and able to do supervision. I worry about things I think about are there are some individuals that have been doing this work a long time, who in my mind I would not be someone that I would think would qualify at that clinical level. And that's saying something very nice. So sorry. But so I mean, again, just an objective measure. And I don't know if that's on you know, if I'm just thinking out loud here. So if they were to say they were 10 years in the field and they can show all this training that they've been able to do to continue, they got a variety of different things. But and they had maybe you know, 2 people that were within the field who were at that clinical license who could you know, be a reference for them. Because I think that goes a long ways, to say 2 people, maybe even 3, not just 1. Because I know of people who go to one person and that person would just, oh yeah, sure, I'll give you a reference. But it's like, okay. So I mean, maybe 2 or 3 references, but to do that. And again, I think it's a good thing to talk about, but I don't want our license, our LCP license, to not be considered worthy because we're changing it and not making it as at that higher status for doctoral level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you've said. I mean, if you found out your doctor didn't pass the boards, you probably would pick a different doctor. I mean, even though but that one's been doing it for 5, 10 years. I want someone that, I mean, it's just a measure to me. I think it's a very sticky, dangerous game or dance that we're looking. I mean, I know some people don't pass it, and maybe we help them with the way that they're studying, or I don't know. It's a super sticky and scary thought to make a change to that for me personally, but
Well, we appreciate everybody's input, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that when Dave gets any feedback from the other states. Our next agenda item is if there are any additional agenda items for today. And looks like our next meeting is scheduled for October 1st. There were some future agenda topics, including a review of certain regulations that are listed there on the agenda. Dave, do you want to talk briefly about why we want to take a look at those?
Sure. And for some of you who have not done a deep dive into the regulations, that might look like a very concerning homework assignment to review all of those regulations. I will tell you, most of those regulations are 1 page. Some of them are a paragraph. But basically, over the last few years, we have, let me frame this first. So when we go through our annual training, we talk about the authority of the board. And the board was created by the Kansas legislature as a public protection agency. The authority of the board comes from statute, which is language that was passed by legislature in bills that became law. And so the statutes define our responsibilities, and then within that statutory authority, the board is able to do regulations, create regulations, draft language that really kind of spells out how the licensing board will implement these steps to make sure that we're following the law in the statute. And so the statute might say the board comes up with continuing education requirements that would include 3 hours of ethics and 3 hours in diagnosis and treatment, or something like that. And something like other requirements as defined by the board and rules and regulations, or provide appropriate documentation when under audit as defined by the board and rules and regulations, something like that. And so when the statute lays out the broad authority or direction, it's basically deferred to the agencies to go ahead and kind of spell that out in more detail. And in a lot of situations, what these regulations do is they provide more direction for licensees or applicants so that they know, okay, well, here's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to fill out this application form. I'm supposed to provide this at that time, or I'm supposed to do this. Or so over the last few years, what we have done is we've brought a lot of these regulations to the advisory committees to review and provide the opportunity for you to make any kind of recommendations on changes. So I mentioned the professional conduct, unprofessional conduct regulations. We've gone through and talked about the educational requirements for licensure, as far as we looked at the in-person requirement versus the synchronous by video screen with some of those class requirements for people when they came through their programs. We talked about the continuing education requirements, the documentation for continuing education requirements. And there was a bill that passed the legislature about 3 or 4 years ago that basically put all agencies on a rotating schedule. At every 5 years, each of these agencies would come before the legislature and would review their regulations and would say, are these regulations necessary for the implementation of state law? And they would link them back to the statutes and talk about, are these appropriate or do they need to be repealed? And so we have done our best to bring you some regulations so far, but there are more general regulations that have not come before the advisory committees in several years. And so I thought it'd be a good idea as kind of a last step in this process to look through what has not gone before the advisory committee, at least in the last 5 years, and then ask you to take a look at some of these. Now, you don't have to necessarily come back with a lot of recommended changes. If you look at it and you say, even though it hasn't been updated in 20 years, the language was general enough, I don't think there needs to be any changes, that's perfectly fine. But part of walking through this is, when we're looking at unprofessional conduct or documentations for continuing education, sometimes it talked about someone having to provide the original paper form. Well, we deal a lot more with electronic things these days, so some common sense changes to language. It's perfectly fine to have copies of things that are sent electronically, that kind of thing. It referenced videotapes and audio tapes when we really have more of recordings and that kind of thing. So some of this is common sense updating language. Some of this may say, have we missed anything when laws have changed recently, like the previous requirement of 4,000 hours of postgraduate experience, when that was lowered to 3,000 hours? Is there any spot that we missed where it still references the 4,000 hours and we need to make sure that it's referencing the 3,000 hours? We always follow the statutes, but the regulations should also sync up. We want to do our due diligence to make sure we're being good stewards of this language and make sure that if someone were reviewing our statutes and regulations, they would all be in conformity. And so part of this is just being good stewards of the regulations, but also it's a good opportunity for you to be more aware of what's actually in the regulations. So it's kind of an educational process too. But we are asking each of the advisory committees to do this. So for each one of the 7 advisory committees at the October meeting, we're just going to run through these, and this can go very fast. We might just look at them and say, are there any recommended changes? And then I might highlight a few items that the staff has come up with, or maybe there's nothing. Or potentially, if it's no longer needed, there might be a recommendation that says, we can do away with this. This was helpful once upon a time, and it's no longer needed. And in that case, that may be the appropriate step too. But I just kind of wanted to frame this and explain why you have a list of these at a future meeting. We wanted to go ahead and allow you enough time to look through these. We also wanted to put it out for anybody from the public if they wanted to ask us questions about these, but we wanted people to have the opportunity that they could watch our future meeting when we're going to be talking about these. And so does that help explain why these are on there for the next meeting? And do you have any questions? I know sometimes we focus on one regulation or another, and this is a lot more, but I hope that kind of framing is helpful to kind of, you have an idea of the expectations, and then we will primarily drive this from the BSRB staff perspective. But if you do have questions about things or recommended changes, we're definitely receptive to that. And then as an advisory committee, your authority is to make recommendations. So if there are recommended changes, we will pass those through to the board, and then the board will have the ultimate discussion about, do you want to make a change to this? And if the board does, then we will put that to the process to make that change.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions about that? All right. Looks like we made it. Good time today. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Thank you. Second.
My second.
All right, Elizabeth, welcome again. Look forward to having you at future meetings. Everybody else, have a great rest of your week. We are now adjourned.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.